you all for coming. It's wonderful to see this room full. I think that we're going to have a great evening. We're going to have some good food. We're going to have a great seminar with some great information. It's going to help you hone your leadership skills and to talk about how to run a meeting using Robert's rules. I'd like to thank Elena Alvarez for putting this seminar together. When I tell you that she has worked hard, she has really, really worked hard. And I really appreciate that she filled the room. And I'm going to introduce her now. So without further ado, Elena Alvarez.
Thank you. Well, I'm a former past president on the current career development program. This is a program that we try to put together every year. We have different formats for this program. Sometimes it's a conference, sometimes it's a workshop, and we offer it for our membership as a continuing education program. And we also want to do this for our community. We try to do it at an affordable price so that we can have a lot of people learning from these workshops. After dinner, we're going to have Andrew Howard give us a presentation about how to use the Robert Rules of Order. Andrew is being highly recommended by a number of people in New York State. He's a lawyer from Albany Law School. He's also the parliamentarian of SUNY Albany, and he's currently a senator aide in the New York State Senate. Before I finish my remark, let me thank my committee. Please stand up to receive the applause of the audience. Cheryl Carter, Miriam Kajasti, Jennifer Hanson just left. She was the one taking the registration. Thank you very much. And of course, Cindy Powell and the board who got a number of errors in the program last Tuesday. Thank you very much. I hope you have a great time. Please don't forget to fill the evaluation form. In your folders, we put together an evaluation form. I look forward to reading them because we use your suggestions for the next program that we put together. Actually, this program happens because some of you recommended it. Finally, we have my Rotarian friend Julie Nocera and her husband. They have marigolds. They have beautiful things to sell for Mother's Day or for any occasion. And also Baby Gray, who have wonderful things that she sold. Well, thank you very much. Have a nice day. Actually, you can start because the dinner is a buffet dinner. I believe the dinner is already served, right?
Right, so I just want to start with a little bit about myself. My name is Andrew Howard. I have a lot of different experiences with Robert's Rules. I was a member of the Student Association at Binghamton University, so I was like a voting member, and then I eventually was the speaker of that body. So I got to see it from both the perspective of like an interested member, and then also like the non-biased chair. I took a test and joined the National Association of Parliamentarians. It's a very exciting organization. I'm sure you've all heard of it. And then just recently, in the last couple of years, I did some work with UAlbany. They brought me into their Senate. And so that's, as the parliamentarian, it was a different role. And mostly what I did was train the chair so that she could run the meetings more smoothly. Because as we'll talk about today, every organization has different misperceptions or like mistakes that get them hung up and really slow their meetings down with And also, as a side note, I did pass the New York State bar recently. I found out last week. So it's I'm still very excited about telling everyone. Tell everyone you know. But with that said, that means that what I'm going to be talking about today is mostly about Robert's Rules, and so I know that all of your organizations probably have different laws or things that affect them and might impact what can and can't be in the bylaws or constitutions, and that's not something I can really speak to as of yet. But I believe my email address is in the flyers, and so if you ask me in maybe 6 months, I could answer those questions then. But now, just to get into the fun part of this, the Robert's Rules. So, I think it's important to have an understanding of what the rules actually are and what they were meant to be, and because a lot of times it's just you come into a meeting, you don't know what's going on, and someone says, "Oh, it's Robert," and everyone just assumes that that's the best thing to use in every situation. But it was actually created by Brigadier General Henry Martin Robert in 1876, and he was an engineer by trade, actually, and he would go around to all these different towns and have different projects with the military, like they'd be building bridges and things like that, and they'd have big meetings where they needed to talk with people and figure out what was best for the community and get everyone's input. And he tried several different ways of running these meetings, like the type Thomas Jefferson has a set of rules that's used in the House and in the Senate, but that became too complicated, so he figured, let me simplify it. And as you all know how simple Robert's Rules is, he was able to create this type of rules that everyone is able to access in theory. And so it became a family, a family thing, and passed it down, and I think there's still Henry Roberts that are involved with writing new editions of Robert's Rules. The most recent edition came out in 2011, and it has things like email and like telecommunications and different things like that you might find in your meetings, like new things that have come up since the 1800s. But it's important to remember, I like to mention his career, because if you think about the rules themselves, like it's very thorough and extensive, and he's thought of literally everything. Like this book has every possible thing that anyone could ever want to do in a meeting. And so there's over 600 pages in this book, and no organization is ever going to need to use every single page. And in fact, most of it is just suggestions about how maybe you could think about putting things in your bylaws. So like a lot of times at meetings you see people like flipping through and like trying to read every single page, when really it's like maybe half of this book is useful like on a regular basis. And with that said, there's the Robert's Rules of Order Newly Revised in Brief, which is much thinner. It's not as much fun to shake over your head in meetings, these are the rules, but it's like you're not going to be reading all the extra stuff, because chances are you're going into an organization that already has bylaws and already has a constitution, so you don't need to be able to think about all of the different parliamentary things that Robert did. Because, like I said, he's an engineer, so engineers are thinking of a million things to make sure that buildings don't fall over and the bridges don't fall over. But that's not really how everyone runs their organization. Like, the meetings have a purpose, and you're not just there to have meetings. Like, that's not the purpose of the meetings. So, basically, the overarching theories behind the Robert's Rules is that the rules are meant to include everyone. So there's requirements for quorum, for vote totals, and things like that. And it's meant to be that everyone is involved in all the decisions. And the more important decisions require more votes, and making sure that like a few rogue members can't just come in and drastically change the entire organization and change everything that's happening. And so with that, a lot of times people will get hung up in the rules and say, like, be really, really strict on them and exclude members of the body because with the strictness. And like, the point of Robert's rules is actually the contrary. It's meant to include everyone. So I always encourage chairs to figure out what someone is asking and process it and say what they're actually meaning. So if someone says like, I want to change this, and it's like, well, you want to amend this to say such and such, and translate it for everyone, because the point isn't like I gave that handout. It's not the point isn't for everyone to have to read and get slowed down with the exact phrasing of all the motions. It's meant to just be so that everyone's on the same page, everyone knows what's going on. And with that, the agenda is a critical tool for making this happen. So that everyone knows what's going on, what's coming next, what's being discussed. Because without, like I said, agenda beforehand, people might not be prepared to talk about something, or someone might try to slip something in, and you're just not prepared to have the conversation. And the point is that everyone's included, everyone knows what's going to be talked about, what's happening. And with that, Robert's Rules has a very particular order about everything. Like the handout I gave out, everything is listed in a particular order, ranking everything so that everything has a place and time. And so with all those considerations, it's just about fairness and making sure that everyone gets a chance to be heard before the body ultimately makes a decision. And so with this, you probably, in your organizations, you have a ton of different documents, and you don't know which is which, but it's all about hierarchies in Robert's Rules. So, of course, the most important thing to remember are the laws and regulations of the state and the federal government. At the end of the day, Robert's telling you to do one thing, and the laws are telling you to do something else. I would follow the law, and as great as Robert is. And that especially holds true with government bodies, like school boards, town boards. I actually spent some time working for Bob Freeman with the Committee on Open Government, and he despises Robert's Rules. There are a lot of small boards that get into these huge arguments about Robert's Rules, and he's like, what's the point? Like, just govern. Like, why are you spending all this time on Robert's Rules? Which, when you come to think about it, it's pretty ironic that Robert Freeman doesn't like Robert's Rules. But so after that comes your organization's charter, and so that's like the document that would be filed with, say, the state or the to actually create the organization. And so that'll have like the purpose of what's going on, like the purpose of the organization. From there, we have a constitution, which lays out how the purpose will be achieved, and the bylaws is set out the day-by-day happenings of the organization. So, as an example, an organization the charter could be that they want to talk about what they want to have really in-depth conversations about what colors are the best. And then the Constitution would lay out how the e-board, who's in the e-board, how often they meet, what are the requirements of their meetings, so that they can carry out talking about different colors. And then the bylaws get even more specific and say, well, when they're debating, there's this much time for each side, and that this is how everyone will be contacted. Like, these are just basically different day-to-day things. From there, after all these things have happened, that's when Robert's Rules fits in. So throughout my talk today, you might have questions in your mind about your organization. And unfortunately, it's usually, well, what's in your constitution, what's in your bylaws? Because a common mistake that people make is, there's one of these motions that I'll get to later is a motion to suspend the rules. You cannot suspend your bylaws, your constitution, your charter, or any laws. You're only talking about Robert's Rules. So, so that's an important thing to remember. from there are different customs that an organization has. Like Robert's Rules will always be talking about customs. That's another thing that confuses many people at first, because they're like, what is a custom? How does things change? Like my experience at SUNY Binghamton was that custom, everyone would say, oh, this is a custom, this is a custom, but it's an undergraduate institution, so every 4 years, brand new customs. Like there's no one that's been there for 20 years in undergrad. So customs are really deceiving, and a lot of times someone might rely on that when they don't have any real basis in the rules. They'll say, oh, well, we customarily do it like this. And like, maybe if that helps move the meeting along, that's nice, but like if it's excluding people or having an effect on the debate, then you want to try to avoid just defaulting to say, oh, it's a custom. And then from there, it's the chair's interpretation, which is meant to be that the chair basically is running the debate, making sure that everyone's involved and a part of the discussions. And so I just want to add as a note that the name is not everything, because at Binghamton, we were very, very meticulous about Robert's Rules. We were obsessed. We were the bane of all the different SUNY schools whenever we went to conferences and things like that, because we were always obsessed with Robert's Rules and no one really cared as much as we did. But at SUNY Albany, the U Albany Senate, their charter, I forget actually how it is, but I think their bylaws are named the U Albany Charter, and then their constitution is their charter, and they have the names all switched around. But in the hierarchy, all that matters is what is the most difficult to change and to amend, because your charter never changes. Like if your charter were to change, it probably would involve like refiling or a lawyers, things like that. The Constitution would be like a big vote that maybe could only happen once or twice a year, like very frequently. And the bylaws are something that you change less frequently, but are still fairly difficult to do, and that it's not like every week you're changing a bylaw back and forth just because it's new. Whereas something like a custom, like you can change the customs as frequently as you like. So, I mean, this is kind of a basic thing, but it's important to realize who is at a meeting and who is involved. We have the chair who creates the agenda, sets the agenda. You might also have e-board members who have different reports that they need to give, things that they need to discuss. Then you have like the voting members of the body who might involve the e-board, might not, might involve the chair, might not, depending on your governing documents. And then there might be people there that aren't actually members of the organization. So as an example, at Binghamton, like I was the chair for many of the meetings, so I would prepare the agenda and make sure all the members knew what was happening. And then the members would have certain rights as voting members, and then members of the public also had a time and a place where they were able to speak. But at the end of the day, the people, you can't just come off the street and come in and vote at the meetings. Like, you can't just come in off the street and set the agenda. Like, there's a different hierarchy of people's roles. And so I think this is a little too small to see, but this is just a basic agenda of what one of the meetings at Binghamton was like. This was basically what I would use every time. I have slides with more like focus. But so this is, what I did was, for the next group of slides, I broke down, and I'm just going to basically walk you through what Robert's like ideal meeting would be and where the different things would fit in, because like I said, everything has a place, everything has a different time. And so at the very beginning, you want to call the meeting to order. This can happen at a particular time. It can happen when a particular number of people get there, but it's usually decided beforehand. It's usually in your bylaws or your constitution. Like, we meet on Tuesdays at 6 o'clock, so at 6 o'clock it's called to order. So, but the meeting hasn't technically started yet, because you need to do roll call to decide if the meeting can actually start. Then you decide what's going to be talked about that night, which you sent out a prospective agenda beforehand. And then I'll talk about minutes, and also there's a period for public comment, which you may or may not have, depending on your organization. So attendance is important for a number of reasons. There are quorum requirements and voting requirements. So you might say that you have a board of 10 people and 2/3 need to be there for you to run your meetings. So that means that you have to have 6 people to start a meeting. And so like even if it was like 6 o'clock on Tuesday, if you have 5 people, your meeting's not started yet. And then it's also important because there's some organizations that say you need to be at X number of meetings before you can vote or before you have the right to vote. So this is like just an important thing to keep track of for whatever internal procedures you might have. So if you have a secretary or something that can take care of that. I like to point out that it doesn't need to be taken vocally. Like one of the trademarks of someone that's just starting to learn Robert's rules is that you move very slowly through things because you want to make sure that they're absolutely right and to the T. But like, and so you absolutely could go and say everyone's name and they all say that they're here, and you could go through a whole list of like, go through this whole room and everyone says their names. But that's not entirely necessary because the whole purpose is to make sure you have enough people. Like I could go around and count and make sure that I have enough people to start the meeting and then just start. Or even have the secretary doing that while the chair is moving on to different things. And so the agenda is important because it's about including everyone and making sure that everyone knows what's happening. So ideally it goes out beforehand, several days beforehand, weeks beforehand, so then people can give input on the agenda and say, oh, we really wanted to talk about this, we really, like, oh, we said we were going to talk about that, or we voted on to table this thing, or we voted to postpone this thing until next week and it's not on there. So that way that you get there and you hand out the agenda, and as the chair, no one's angry at you that something's not on there. Like, so you've already had a discussion and said, yeah, we're going to include that because of X, or no, we're waiting on adding that because of Y. So that way that you make sure that you have the best quality discussions possible. So if, just to jump back to my organization of people discussing what colors are the best, if you have an expert in red, like maybe, and you know that the next meeting the red person isn't going to be there, then maybe you want to keep that color off the agenda for that week and say to everyone, just be open about it. Like, oh, well, we're not going to talk about that because we're waiting for that individual to have the most information possible before that debate. And minutes are actually an interesting thing. It's one of those, well, they're interesting to me, that is. It's a very critical thing that you could spend all your time on minutes. You could spend a bunch of money or a bunch of time writing out every single word, and Robert would love that. That would be fantastic for Robert because he wants everyone to know what's going on. He wants to know, like, anyone that's not there, they want to know what's going on. But the requirements of the rules are just that you make sure that you have all the motions, you have all the things being discussed, and basically a really easy way to do that is you just have a copy of the agenda and you go through and you say each thing that's happened on the actual agenda. The minutes are just like this formality. Usually they're written up, you give out the draft minutes, people look over them as they're getting in their seats, and then you're moving through the agenda, you've done all the things that I previously discussed, and then minutes, and then you just keep moving on because usually, practically people don't remember exactly what they said, and so that's also why it's good not to say exactly verbatim what people said. but just like what the discussions were, the major points, so that you can kind of remember the essence of the conversation.
Just a question on the floor.
Yes.
Hi, sorry. Does Robert's Rules recognize the consent agenda?
That's funny. I was actually thinking if I should mention that. What I think you mean is, like a chair. Sometimes what I actually recommend is that a chair will take like a really active role. And so when you get to something like the minutes, like it's clear that like no one wants to go through and look at every single minute and talk about everything. You don't want me to read out the minutes to you. And so what I might say is, like without any objection, we're going to have, like, is there any objection to passing the minutes as they are right now? And usually that will move the meeting faster. So I could, with Robert's Rules, I could take a lot of time and say, so like you've seen the minutes, now we're going to move into debate. Can I have a list of pro and con speakers? And then no one wants to talk on it. And I say, okay, since there's no one talking, can we close the debate? Okay, now we've closed the debate. And so you can spend all these times going through all these steps when really it's not controversial. You can just say, like, as you had said, like, just keep things moving, and because I mean, Robert's very detail oriented. You could spend all day talking about minutes that no one cares about, and he would be completely satisfied, but it doesn't really have the running of your meeting. And so the next phase of the agenda that I have split into 4 different parts are different reports. And now, this is again something that varies depending on your organization, because you might have different people coming in to explain something. Like you might bring in a guest speaker to talk about something that a problem that you're facing. At Binghamton, we would have members of like faculty bodies come in and speak to the undergraduates and tell us what was going on at their meetings. And just basically coming in and giving a report. So so you have outside organizations, you have chairs, the chairs report, and then you have executive board reports. Will they say what they're working on, or that they're not doing anything, or things like that. Or then you have the committees. Well, they'll say what they're working on, or they might actually have come to a decision that needs to be discussed and probably approved. And so a big question, a question I actually got beforehand was, do you have to approve, the question was, do you have to approve the financial committee's reports? And so the financial committee, especially in non-for-profits, are something that's really governed in law. And like I said, it's not something I really want to talk about since I'm not fully admitted yet, but it's important to remember that the laws just recently changed. The Non-for-Profit Revitalization Act came into effect last year, so it might be a little bit different. But for the most part, the general rules in Robert's Rules are that you vote on things that have finished product or a decision that the body could have made. So if you have the president coming in and saying, I was looking at different venues for this event that we're having, that's not something that you need to approve. It's not, because the body doesn't get to micromanage the executive board and what they're doing. But if the president came and said, the president needed approval of the venue because of the rules and bylaws, the president came in and said, I chose this venue, then you would have to approve just that part of the report. So sometimes, I've seen in the past organizations that get bogged down with trying to approve, because it was undergrad, they're like, oh well, I can't approve this report because that person swore in their report, and I can't approve of that. And that's not really like.
Yeah.
Hold on, let's make sure we don't. Is shaking like my laptop, 10% means that it's going to die in any second. It's on the side.
Sorry for not doing
Okay, we're good now. There you go, Cindy.
And now we've turned it around and it's plugged in. It's fantastic. Yeah, so I think I pretty much explained it for us. If you have any questions, since a lot of this is so organization specific, I might not touch upon some kind of issue that you're having. I know that at Binghamton we'd have little things like someone would say like a motion of personal preference about something, and then they would say something, and like I've looked through Robert's Rules so many times, I've never heard of that motion before, but at Binghamton, for some reason, we thought that that was the thing. So really, it just depends on your organization and who is involved, because every once in a while, you get one person who makes things up and says, oh, well, look at page 302, personal preference, it's right in there if you just look at it, and no one wants to open the book, so you're just like, all right. Like. So if you have any questions, feel free to yeah.
I got one quick one. You're having a board meeting, you approve the agenda, you're going through the meeting, and then a board member wants to try to force the board to discuss and vote on an issue that's not on the agenda.
Yeah, so the agenda is like a living, like breathing thing, and it's like when you send it out, it's not set in stone, and when the meeting starts, it's not necessarily completely set. So at any time, someone could come in and go through the motions and amending the agenda to force a discussion on something. But I guess force isn't really like the exact term though, because they need a I believe it's a majority vote to amend the agenda. It's on the sheet. Like I always forget what the vote was, but it's not like one person on a 10-person board can be like, we have to talk about X, and then it has to happen. Like the idea is that the whole body is involved in every decision, and including the agenda. That's why you vote on in the beginning. And so I'll talk more specifically about motions kind of towards the end, but so like yes and no. Yes, you could amend it, but not just like a rogue person trying to make something happen. But also never forget the caveat that it depends on your organization. It could be a rule that you can only discuss what's on the agenda, or you have to have a set agenda a week beforehand, in which case you couldn't change it. That's something like as far as like a town board or something, that's something I can't exactly remember the rules for that, like the laws for that, but I mean, you could definitely have a rule that says you can only talk about what's on the agenda. Yeah.
Well, I noticed if you go back a few slides, you had these list of things, and approval of the agenda was in red.
Yeah.
You didn't exactly say why, but I suspect it's because that's really important in terms of running the meeting. You get everybody to agree to the agenda, you vote to accept or modify the agenda as presented, and then you move forward. And so therefore, when somebody brings something up at the middle of the meeting, I would presume the chair can then say, well, we've already approved the agenda. And so it would take an extra special motion to readjust it.
Yeah, exactly. That's like, I had it in red because it's something that's very easily forgotten.
Yeah.
And it's also a really great tool to just get everyone involved. Because someone will say, why are we talking about this? It's like, well, I sent it out beforehand, I asked for suggestions, you didn't contact me. Then I showed you the agenda and you didn't say anything before the meeting. Then we made it to this point of the meeting, we voted on the agenda, and you didn't talk about it then either. Or on the contrary, the person could every step of the way be saying, I want to talk about this, I want to talk about this, I want to talk about this. And then you actually can go back to the vote on the agenda and say, well, you didn't have enough votes to change that. And a tool that the chair can use is that if someone is making repetitive motions, then they can no longer accept them. So even though it might be in order to ask them in the agenda to talk about X, after every single item or every time someone takes a breath while they're speaking, asking. After a while, it's well, we already voted on it. We're moving on. We're keeping the meeting going. But yeah, so it's a really important tool to just include and make sure everyone's included in the process. So that answer it here. All right. So the committees are unique. I feel like I'm repeating myself, but committees are unique depending on the organization. So a standing committee will be in your constitution or possibly even in your bylaws, most likely in your constitution. So you might have an elections committee, an events committee, or something like that always happens. You always have a need for this. A temporary committee would be something that you come up to a certain issue and something that needs more work, more conversation. Because the point with Robert's rules, your meetings aren't really meant to be a conversation. You're not meant to be working on anything. You're meant to be voting and deciding on things. So a committee is a smaller group. Usually, you might run them according to Robert's rules, but it's much different because very much different because you have to talk about, you have to have discussion and learn things, and everyone brings in information and is discussing things. So it doesn't really make sense for you to have to keep changing the agenda or talk just so you can talk about different things for one event that you're having. But the important thing about a committee is that it exists underneath the body. So any decision that they make is most likely going to have to be approved by the body. So in their report, they'll say that my previous example, we said that the president has to choose the venue, but then the committee set up the date and the time and everything like that, and then they present it as a report, and then it gets voted on and approved. The temporary committee might be someone has something that's trying to force into the agenda. They really want to talk about X, and you can say, well, what if we were as chair, what if I create a temporary committee so that we can investigate X and then have them bring back their findings in a month, and then we can have a real educated discussion on X. Or someone can make a motion and say, a motion to refer to a committee, or create a main motion to create a committee to do whatever research is necessary. But it's an important tool because if you have a large group, if we were all in a meeting, we shouldn't be all pitching in time to try to figure out when the next thing is going to be happening. It doesn't work with the large body. Whereas if you have a group of 10 people, they can really hash things out and have different discussions and bring different things to the table. And it doesn't need the formality that a big group would need for everything to run smoothly. And so, the next part of the agenda is business. And now, what your business is it depends on your organization. I mean, you could be discussing colors, every day you have a different color that you need to discuss. You could be doing something whatever it is that your organization's doing, you could be voting on here. They're usually, with Robert's rules, it's actually a 2-meeting schedule. By default, it's a 2-meeting schedule. So in new business, someone will present and say, this is the thing that we're trying to do, this is the business. We're trying to do X, Y, and Z, and this is the reasons why we're doing it. And then people ask questions, and you explain like, oh, this is why we're doing it, this is what we're discussing. But at that point, it then gets moved to old business. So as a chair, I'd say like, seeing no objections, we'll see this in old business next week. That way, it's all about putting people on notice and making sure that everyone's prepared to have the debate. So then when something is an old business, everyone already knows what it is, everyone has come prepared or has thought about it a little bit. And then that's when it's not question and answer, it's more like confrontational, and that's not really the word I'm looking for, but it's more about like saying different sides, pros and cons, trying to hash out how people are going to vote, what's going to be decided. Internal business is something that chances are your organization may not use, but that is something that happens faster. So if it's like, as chair, I'm stepping down and a new chair needs to be appointed, that would be something that you need to have happen that week. It doesn't make sense to go 2 meetings to replace a chair, or to appoint a new committee chair or a new committee person or something like that. But that's just various internal business. Whereas the idea being that all the really important things, all the things that are pointing to your purpose go into the new and old business. So here are the examples that I was actually looking for before and couldn't remember. It's basically carrying a purpose organization, telling e-board members what to do. Like, for example, you could say, I really want the president to look at venues in Waterville. So then you have discussion and then you take a vote and you decide the president's got to look in Waterville to find venues because that's really important to our organization. Creating a committee, as I discussed, or passing like a resolution. Like if an organization wanted to endorse a candidate for something, or if they wanted to take a stance on a local project or something like that, that would be a resolution, because it's a resolution and not a bill, and that it's non-binding. So depending on what your organization is, you may do resolutions, you may not do any at all. With the student government in Binghamton, we didn't really have the power to do anything, so we would create a resolution to say like, we really want to be able to, a big problem one year is they wanted to do chalk on the sidewalks, and the university was dead set against it because it was vandalism or something, and so we passed a resolution that we really want to set rules that would allow us to chalk certain areas of the pavement. And whereas we can't force the university to do something because we're not affiliated with them, they're not under control, but it's something that's important to the organization and fits our purpose of advocating for students. And at the end of the meeting, there, again, you have a second set of attendance and a roll call, but you also have announcements. And announcements can be related to the organization, or they could not be, but it's members that is talking during announcements. So in a public comment, someone from the public could say, my organization that isn't related to yours is doing X, Y, and Z, like we love you all to go there, and go and do that. But in announcements, it'd be like, I'm a member, and I'm part of another organization that's doing this event, and I think you all should go to that event. I just want to talk about that briefly. So basically just members versus people in public making different announcements. And then you have the adjournment. Another question that I had beforehand was, can you just adjourn a meeting, or does there have to be a motion and then a discussion and then like a vote, and it's just like what I had mentioned earlier with the minutes, where I could say, seeing no more items on the agenda, without objection, the meeting is now adjourned, and then the meeting is adjourned. And it just skips a lot of steps. But if that person has been harping on talking about X and they want to get it in the agenda, and you know what, you you plan to have the meeting for 2 hours and you still got time, and then maybe the body would be able to reconsider amending the agenda and adding that item. But if the other thing that you can do is have a meeting that's set only for, say, 2 hours, and then you're done. So that could mean that you could get to the 2-hour mark in the middle of discussing some item of business, like you got bogged down because someone wanted to make sure and make all the spelling fixes in the minutes during the discussion. So you got really bogged down, and so you finally made it into business, and then you have that 2-hour adjournment. So at that point, if your rules allow it, you could, the chair could like call to see if there's any motions to extend the time to talk about more things, or it could just end up being that you have to say like, sorry, everything that's on the agenda will be on next meeting's agenda. I can't, I'm not able to change anything, or like, we've lost the use of the room, so now we have to move on.
Question over here?
Yes.
Do you have to have a motion to adjourn?
No. No, you don't have to have one, but there could be one at any time. Like, someone could be in an announcement, it could be announcement and talking for a very long time about something that's not really relevant, and someone could motion at that time and say, and they want to adjourn, like in the middle of the announcement, just end it. But if you get to the end of the agenda and you have nothing else to talk about, like, of course the chair would just be like, all right, there's nothing else to talk about, without objection we can adjourn. And then someone could object, and then you would say, then you would have to like move into a debate and go through all the formalities. And chances are, if you ever get to that point, 99% of the people want to go home anyway. So like, it's a very easy vote to have when you say like, all right, so who wants to keep holding the meeting? And there's like one person. But that's one of those things where people get hung up in like the intricacies of Robert's rules, and it's very important to do things correctly, but that doesn't always mean that there has to be so many steps. When I am chairing a meeting, I like to ask almost always, is without any objection, then this is going to pass, because chances are, if the body's been doing work on it and there's like a lot of work going into that piece of business, people want it approved because everyone's been involved with the process. Ideally, you've been open through the whole process. Everyone knows what's happening, we're involved if they want to be. And so then you don't need to worry about that. Okay, so now that I've kind of walked through the agenda, does anyone have any questions about that? Like anything that, yes?
On the agenda, the approval, does it go out to every member?
Yeah. Yeah, so do you mean like beforehand, you send it out to every?
Yes, it goes out to every member.
You would send it out to every voting member.
Every voting.
Yeah, or you might be required to post it publicly, or it might just be a good idea to post the agenda publicly so that interested people could come from the public. The idea is to have everyone know what's going on beforehand, so you definitely want to share it as early as possible. I know sometimes if you meet every week, that might be difficult to do it more than a few days ahead of time. But it's just about making sure that everyone's on the same page. And then like you usually have them printed, or everyone comes in with like tablets. Everyone would have it on their tablet or something, and so then everyone has it there with them as well, or you have it up on like a projector or something, so everyone knows what it is beforehand. Because like, I could be following all of Robert's rules, but I never gave out an agenda and we never approved it, and I'm just sitting with it at my podium, and then that's not inclusive at all. Like, then I'm the only one that knows what we're talking about, and I could run a really fast meeting if none of you knew what I was talking about. And they're like, all right, so like item 2, is there any objection? Great, like that's passed. And I could run through everything, and it's like, you'd be like, wow, like Andrew's the greatest chair we've ever had. Meetings are 5 minutes long, it's fantastic. But like, no one knows what's happening, there's no input in the agenda beforehand. So it's not really that discussion that Robert was looking for. Does that answer your question?
So with the approval of the agenda, you do need to get a vote then, right?
Yes, you can you can either do what I've been discussing where you say like if is there without any objection then the agenda is passed as it is right now. And so that by there being no objections, it's a unanimous decision that the agenda is passed. But if there was an objection, at that point we'd move into a debate because I believe that the agenda is debatable. Then usually what happens is the person who had the objection describes the reason and say, well, I really wanted to do this thing. And then other people say why they don't want to include that thing or something like that. And then there's a vote on the agenda. So is that kind of clear? I just want to make sure that I kind of answered your question before I...
This might clarify her question.
Yeah.
So if we're having a board meeting, and then we have a body of membership, so do the board minutes go out to the whole membership, or do they just go out to the board members that are going to most likely be at the meeting?
Unfortunately, it depends, but since it would be happening internally, the e-board might have like e-board minutes that need to be approved in each e-board meeting, because e-board meetings would be more frequent than the full body meetings. And then at that point, you might be required to have the e-board minutes put into the full body agenda. You might not. I'm always advocating for like including everyone in what's going on. So I would say, of course, like include them in your report.
Right, but then the approval of the agenda happens at the meeting. All the members ahead of time could say, hey, don't forget to discuss this at the board meeting, and we put it on the agenda. And then when we get to the board meeting, is that when we, maybe just redistribute it, and then we say, do we accept this agenda for this meeting? If that happens at the meeting?
Yes, because you can only vote to approve an agenda at a meeting. So that means that everyone's there, you have a quorum, you have everything you need to start the meeting, and then the meeting starts, and then you can approve the agenda. So before that point, it's still like perspective. Did you have a question?
Well, yeah, because I think the question before that, it sounded to me like if there's no objection, we'll accept the agenda as presented or whatever, and that's what we're going to follow. But if somebody has an objection to it, they would discuss it and they would tell why they want to change it. And then wouldn't you have, this is where it's confusing, would you have a motion to accept the agenda first, then a motion to amend the agenda, but somehow you have to amend the agenda if you're going to add whatever somebody had an objection to, which could be reordering the agenda. No, we want to do this first and that last because Joe has to leave early. We want to move it up in the agenda, and you would amend it.
Okay. Yeah, I was unclear on that. So the way that would work is someone would say like, I object to the agenda, and by objecting to the agenda and explaining what they wanted to be included, that would be, they would be making a motion to amend the agenda.
Yeah.
So at that point you say, I really want to talk about X, it's really important to me for all these reasons. And then you would debate on whether to include that amendment. And so you vote on the amendment first, and then the entire minute, then the entire agenda, sorry. So the idea being that you always do the part first, and then you move up to the bigger thing. So to add another layer to that, like someone could be saying, I want to amend the agenda to include X, and then someone could say, well, I want to amend that amendment to include Y, because I don't think we can talk about X unless we talk about Y. And then someone else could say, I want to talk about Z because you can't talk about, and then that's when it cuts off, thankfully. So it's just 2 levels of amendments. And so you would first vote on including Y with the X, then you would vote on including, assuming it passes, X and Y, and then you would go back to voting on the entire agenda. Yes?
Point of clarity, if I may. The way that I'm interpreting Cindy's question, that if there's a board with secretary, treasurer, vice presidents, directors, and they have their meeting. Those board minutes are not approved of at the general membership meeting. Those minutes are approved by the bodies of the board. And that most likely is not prior to the general membership. It wouldn't be approved until the next board cycle because the minutes have not been processed and been sent out. So my reasoning for bringing this up is point of clarity for you because you do have a couple organizations present here tonight, and that would not be an agenda item to approve board meeting minutes.
Easy for you to say, Susan.
Have another glass of wine. Just trying to simplify that for you, because I'm assuming you do understand how this works, and you're doing a wonderful job, but I'm trying to answer Cindy's question. And I hope that I interpret it that way, that Cindy's question.
Yeah, because when I was talking about minutes, these are like the body minutes. And so it's only the general membership minutes. What I was talking about was because it's all about the hierarchy. So it's like you have the general body and then you have the e-board over here, and then they have their own internal minutes that they're internally each meeting approving.
That's what she's trying to get at.
Yes, and so like you would be approving them at each like e-board meeting, and then perhaps you would bring those minutes to a general body meeting to say this is what we've been working on, and that would be in the report of the e-board members. So maybe the president, if they're meant to be like the chair of the e-board, then the president would say, these are like the minutes we've been working on. Maybe you include the minutes, maybe you just create a different report to talk about all the things in the minutes. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, yes.
Thank you.
I'm confused. If the chair, president, whatever, makes up the agenda, why should it be voted on by the members who, what do they care as long as we're discussing? And if they wanted to add something to the agenda, they could get in touch with the president, chair, whatever, beforehand to include it on the agenda. Why does it have to be voted on?
It's all about involving everyone and making sure that everyone's involved in decisions. So the chair isn't like their own autonomous like person in that they're not making their own agenda, they're making the organization's agenda, they're making the body's agenda.
So when something is to be discussed, then you have it, then anyone's entitled to discuss it.
Yeah, like, and ideally, like someone reaches out to the chair and says, I want to talk about this, and the chair says, all right, it's going to be on there. But in the real world, it's like, oh, I meant to put that on there, I forgot, or I like that person was rude to me, I don't want to include that. So the idea being that you vote on the agenda to make sure that it's like a check on the chair, to make sure that the chair is actually doing what they're supposed to be doing. So so then it's out in the open that they're not putting that on the agenda, even though it's like, oh, I emailed you on Wednesday, why wasn't that on the agenda? And so it's like, it's meant because you don't want the chair's personal feelings or the chair's personal decisions to have an unknown effect on the body. You want everyone to be involved with the processes. Does that make sense? Because it's like there's
1 month to go, I'm fine.
Because it's meant you want to be having a good working relationship with everyone as a chair, and you want to be putting in everything they say, but it's also good for the members to know that if there was ever a problem with what's being put on the agenda, that it's discussed in front of the whole group. And so then in that way, you have everyone buying into the discussion, and it's not like, oh, like that agenda was terrible, the chair is terrible. It's like, well, we all bought into that agenda at the beginning, we all voted on it. Like it was we were all, you know.
Could that item be new business?
Yes.
So it's not an issue. So it's not objectionable. Don't worry about it.
What do you mean?
To her. She doesn't have to worry about if something that someone wanted to talk about wasn't on the agenda. They're not going to be causing conflict with her because it's not a line item on the agenda. It's an item that can always be brought up under new business.
Yeah, at the beginning.
Because I ask if anybody needs to discuss something.
Yeah, like
It's not so formal.
Yeah, well, and it never really has to be, and you never have to like use every page of the book, like, but sometimes it makes sense to have those discussions at the beginning of the meeting when you're approving the agenda, so that like everyone can prepare for that later on in the meeting. And so like, if you wanted to like bend the rules a little bit, and then when you get to new business to say, is there any new business? Like, you might be able to get away with that, but it doesn't have all the safeguards of it being on the agenda beforehand or talking about it at the beginning of the meeting. So like, because ideally, everyone in the organization's on the same page and you can just breeze through Robert's rules. You don't have to worry about all these steps or all the debates because everyone's just on the same page. But that might not happen. We might be dealing with really tough issues that have a lot of conflict. And it might be that like something really controversial, like endorsing someone for president. Someone's like, well, let's not deal with that. Let's not talk about that. And so then it's like, well, do we really want to move into that area? I don't know. And so like, it might be something new that you haven't thought of because a purpose can be very broad for your organization. You might not be sure even what you want to talk about in meetings. And I think I saw another thing.
I just had like a kind of a comment on that because I think, like you just covered it, that we can use Robert's rules. We can take them as seriously as we want to as an organization. But like before I have a board meeting, I just send out an email and I say we're going to have a regular agenda. If anybody wants to add anything, let me know. And then when you get to the meeting and you've got your minutes, what I'm hearing is that then all the board members would get a copy of the agenda, and then we would say, does everybody agree with this agenda? And if they do, then we're good to go. So you don't have to be like, do I take you don't have to be that strict just because the book says it. You can still go through those motions, but not take it so seriously. Like, oh, you're out of order, you're done. You can do that.
Yeah.
No one has ever suggested an item to put on the agenda, Joanne.
But if you think about it, let's say you have a problem board member that wants to like just bang your head against the wall on some subject that doesn't matter. This could save you from having to have all that discussion if you've already approved that agenda and said, this is what we have time for, this is what we're going to do, and we didn't have that on the agenda. So it might save you. Exactly.
Yeah, because like the whole idea being that there are so many safeguards and things that you can do that not only make the meeting more open, it makes it appear more open. And so like, if you've never had anyone ask to add anything to the agenda, then that must mean that you're a great chair, right? Because that means that like you're talking about all the things that people want to talk about. But like, or like, because sometimes we'll run into problems where you'll have one board member that is like has a habit of writing emails and not pressing send, and so like they'll be like, why aren't all my things on the agenda? What's going on with that? Like, why are you just trying to silence my voice or something? And then they like start talking about the Constitution, et cetera, et cetera. But it's like it's meant to be so that if that does happen, it's not like slowing the meeting down and then you're talking about all these internal, it's like just make another check. Yeah.
If some people are interested in what you bring up, can the chairman say, create a committee and discuss it and report back to the board at the next meeting? So that it doesn't take up the time during the meeting, but that people are recognized and then, can bring it up at the next meeting. Can you then create a meeting?
Yeah, that's
create a committee?
Generally, the chair has the ability to create committees, like ad hoc committees, just like we decide that we're going to talk about X, and then we get into X, and we realize that during the debate, people don't know what they're talking about. They don't know what X is, and so, and then you're like, wait, like, what do we know what X? And then all of a sudden, like, what was meant to be like a debate of two opposing sides, they're like explaining things to each other. They're like, oh, great, thanks. I didn't realize that. I didn't realize that Y was so involved with X, and et cetera, et cetera. So at that point, the chair could say, like, the chair could ask for a motion and say, like, I'm seeing how the discussion is going. Are there any motions for creating a committee? Or I would say, without any objection, I'm going to create a committee to talk about X. And so, because it's all about using the tools of Robert's Rules in the way that they're most effective. And that a looser form of Robert's Rules is much better for a discussion. Like, I'm not, like, going out with friends and using Robert's Rules as much as I would like to, using Robert's Rules in conversations. But, because there's a time and place for it. But then if my friends and I create some kind of civic society, then we would use Robert's Rules with it. And so, so now it's, as we move to motions, it's all about the chair really having an understanding of what people are trying to do and making sure that everyone knows what's happening. Because Robert's Rules, like, you always want to be asking yourself as a chair, where are we? What are we talking about? What motions are we on? So like as the chair, you want to know, all right, we're talking about the agenda, approving the agenda, and we're talking about the amendment to add X. And so I'm verbalizing that and telling everyone in the room, like, I'm now opening the debate to amend the agenda to add X, and now I'm taking the list of pro and con speakers. And so you always want to make sure that everyone knows what's going on and all the things that are happening. And so that way, everyone knows what they're voting on. A common thing is you get to a vote, and then 2 or 3 people wake up and they're like, wait, what? What are we voting on? And if I just say, we're moving into a vote, then they're like, all right, like, yes, I don't know. I don't know what's going on, of course, yes. Whereas if I say, all right, we're moving into a vote, and usually that makes people like snap in, like, oh, vote. And then you're like, we're voting on the amendment to the agenda to add X. And so it's all about going through the steps and through all the layers so that people know what is that's going on. And so usually what happens is that the chair will have the most knowledge, hopefully have the most knowledge of Robert's Rules in the room. And so then someone else might say, like we were talking before, like, oh, I want to talk about X. And so it's the chair's job to make sure that what the body wants is happening. So someone says, oh, I want to talk about X. And so they say, all right, so there has been an amendment to, there's been a motion to amend the agenda and basically translate it and like speak how Robert would so that everyone knows kind of what's happening. Or if your organization, if you need to know your members, so if speaking like Robert doesn't help them, then say, yeah, so we want to talk about X, and so we're thinking about adding it right here. And so it's all about speaking to your members, because there are some people who will instantly understand Robert's Rules and they just have like brains that work like machines. It's like click, 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 click. Yeah, Robert's Rules is great. I love how everything's ordered. I wish my whole life was fitting into Robert's Rules. And then there'll be other people who are like, but I just want to talk about X. Why can't I just talk about X? Why do I have to do all of these different steps? And so it's the chair's job to kind of create like a middle ground where you can have the conversations and talk about all things that you want to talk about.
Question?
Yeah.
Do you have to go in a specific direction? Could you start the voting pointing to the left, for example, on a motion? Because I have noticed that sometimes, you know, everybody goes to the right, people are seated at the right, form a block, the left looks how the wind blows, and people who might have called you before and say, you know, we really don't agree, when it comes to that block voting one way, then, you know, people will vote to say, oh, is that the way the wind is blowing, and vote that way. But I thought if you then could go to the left and basically, you know, motion, okay, and what's the vote, then, you know, they have to put their card on the table. Does it matter left or right?
Interesting question. I can't remember off the top of my head. I think the answer is left to right. The chair goes from left to right. But I think it's also at the chair's discretion. So like, if they could go left one time, right the other time. But if you're finding in your organization that people always sit in the same chairs, things always happen a certain way, like it's determinative of the outcome of a vote depending on what direction you go in, then maybe you want to set up in your bylaws that it has to be every other when you take votes. Or you may want to create some rule so that you can take care of like that institutional problem with your particular organization. Where like, I mean, like I can, if you send me an email, I can find out exactly in Robert's rules. But I believe it's left to right, and that's and I want to open that up to anyone. If any of you have any questions that I don't answer properly, like you keep raising your hand. Sorry. No, I mean like for now, but you can just send me an email and I'll be happy to. If you leave driving home, you're just thinking about Robert's rules like I always am, and then feel free to send me a question because I bet I've been thinking about Robert's rules more than you have. So.
I was just looking at the slide. It says speaker interprets your motion. I presume this is because that's the legislature. Most organizations don't have a speaker. So what role is the speaker? Is that the secretary or the chair?
The speaker is the chair, the person running the meeting.
Okay.
That's what we named the chair at my so that's what I always think of myself as the speaker wherever I am. But yeah, so it's the chair interprets your motion.
Okay.
So that could be the president in your e-board, it could be a particular person at your general body meetings. Yes?
I just wonder what your email was.
It's andrew.n.howard@gmail. So N is in Nicholas.
Can you say that again, please?
andrew.n.howard@gmail. I'm so excited to see you all writing it down because that means I'm going to have lots of Robert's rules.
I'm so excited.
Yeah, like every time my phone beeps now, I'll be like, yes, Robert's rules.
I want to ask a question about the consent agenda because somebody asked about it in the beginning. But the way I've used, on certain groups use consent agendas is you can put kind of routine approvals on it, like your minutes, your whatever, something very routine, and you could just ask for a motion to approve the consent agenda, and then it's just taken care of. Is that appropriate? I've been on a few groups that have done that to speed up meetings.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Andrew's head's gonna explode.
It can, Robert.
Something I haven't encountered. I'm not familiar with that. So that means that I don't think that that's in Robert's rules.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
But does that mean that it's a bad thing? Maybe, maybe not. Because you could absolutely, you could speed things up. But the question is, how right are you in what you're putting in your consent agenda?
Right.
And if you're splitting it up and if it even becomes to a point where you're questioning whether, am I just putting that in there because I'm trying to slip it in or not as chair? Then absolutely, it's just not going to work for the organization. You could go through and you could do. It gives you more flexibility if you just leave it out as a whole agenda, because then I could go through and I could try to pass every single thing as a consent item. So I could go to new business and say, or I could go to something in old business and say, without any objection, we're going to pass this old business we talked about last week. And whereas there's a perception if you come into a meeting and you say, well, all these things are on the consent agenda, it's almost like they're not as important, and so then people might be like, what are you trying to get past me? What are you trying to see past? So it's just more of that. Yes.
Just a suggestion, because I work with an organization that used consent heavily. So if anybody's interested in this, you can put things on the consent agenda. You give the absolute right to anybody to pull something from the consent, non-debatable. No, I want to talk about that item, fine, it's moved to some order of business to be voted, discussed and voted on separately. So it's a non-debatable issue, and so you can't run things by people.
Yeah, I think some people were able to do that, but your question was basically like, you were just talking about how you can use a consent agenda and basically say anyone can remove anything from there and move it around. And for that, I would say that's what an agenda should be just in general.
Right.
Like, that's because, I mean, you could, because in my eyes, that's almost adding an extra layer of complexity. Maybe that's just because I'm not familiar with the consent agenda. Maybe that works with your organizations. But in my mind, it makes more sense to have everything there and to just try to make everything consent agenda. Where like, because it's just more like keeping everything in line. And then like, if maybe you have a really extensive consent agenda that things other people don't see, they don't realize, and it's just about making sure that you go through the steps, like the bare minimum being like saying each thing and saying it's approved. But if that was a part of your agenda creation process and it works for your organization, if people don't have problems with it, and they think that's open and quicker, faster, then great, because that's the point, is for everyone to have quick meetings that make sense and everyone's involved in. So was there any other questions? So now we're getting kind of into the meat and bones of people speaking over meetings, which from the sounds of it, there aren't a lot of people doing that, because like the woman in the back said she's never had anyone add anything to an agenda ever. So maybe you don't have people that are making motions. Maybe if they understood the motions better, they would have more motions to make. I know a lot of times people just sit quietly when they don't understand. That's how I was when I first encountered Robert's Rules, was like, I don't know how to say what I want to do, so I'm just going to sit and watch terrible things happen because I don't know what exactly to say. But usually what I suggest as a chair is taking time out of a meeting to explain what all the different motions are. So I've given you on a handout a list of all the motions, and so in a very it's a very Robert chart, in that anything you could ever want to do is on this list. So, but the idea being that each motion has its own place, its own hierarchy. So if you look at the first part one, there, in main motions, they occur on like a stacking basis. So once you move higher up on the list, you can't talk about anything below them. So if someone has made a motion to adjourn, which is the top one on the list, someone can't interrupt that to say that they want to take a break, or they want to refer the item to a committee, because of the order of it. The most important thing is ending the meeting, because that's way more important than creating a committee or trying to amend a motion or something, because like the meeting's done, it's done. But all the other things just fit in and it goes in an order. So let's say that you have a motion to amend the agenda to discuss X. And so then someone creates a motion and says, oh, I want that to a committee, and so X. And so you see on the list of the hierarchy that referring to a committee is higher up, and so then that is actually, that makes sense. So you see that referring to a committee is actually higher up than the amending. But then someone would say, well, actually, the food just got here, can we go for a recess? And then you see that that's above there, so then you would consider that. The idea being that, like, the most important things happen first, and then you move on down the line with the main motions. It's very formulaic the way it stacks. The second grouping of motions are incidental motions, and these are meant to be things that happen immediately, that they're really important things that were to happen. Like, yes.
When it says
you say, who's you? Anybody?
The motion maker, yes.
The one that makes the motion?
Yeah, so they would like stand up and say the motion, or get the chair's attention and say the motion.
Okay, what, suppose nobody does it, is it up to then the head, the chair, or whatever? To say, well, someone,
Well, if the chair thinks that it's in the benefit of the society to talk about something, or the body to talk about it, then they can look for it and say, like, does anyone want to make this motion? Because I think someone should. And then someone can take that, and then they're basically the one that's saying the motion. Then you look for seconds, and then you look for like the different steps that you have to go through. So with that said, I also wanted to discuss seconds. This is just something that came to my mind. Whenever you make a motion, almost all motions require a second. So that means that there needs to be at least 2 people on a body to make any decision. Because someone wants to amend the agenda to talk about X, and they don't even have a friend that wants to talk about X too, you're not going to have a majority to amend the agenda. It's just one person, and so then that's a very quick way to move on and say, well, you're the only one who wants to talk about X, I'm sorry. Well, maybe we can talk about it at the next meeting, I don't know, and you can move on from there. But yeah, back to going through the monotony of all these different motions. Originally, I had thought about going through and reading all these to you and explaining what they mean, but instead, I'm going to say, if you've seen anything on here that you don't understand on this list, that seems like something you might want to use, just let me know if you haven't seen anything you don't see. You can also send me an email. What else? As far as the process for a debate, it's important to just be as open as possible with debates. That's the most contentious part of the meeting. So you want to, whenever you move into debate, I always like to say, we're about to move into debate, this is what's going to happen. You get pro and con speakers, you write them out. It seems like a strange thing, but that way it's a very easy step to make sure that everyone gets to talk about what they want to talk about, no one's forgotten. You always start with the con speakers, because in theory, the people making the motion have already said, I want to make this motion because of such and such. So you always start with the con side. Then you move into the pro side. And you go back and forth, depending on your rules. I know at Binghamton it was 5 minutes this side, 5 minutes that side, 5 minutes this side, 5 minutes that side. And you just keep going until everything is exhausted. Like, no one else wants to speak, no one else has anything to say, there's no more speakers. If in the middle of the debate one person is going on and on and on talking about X and all these reasons why they want to talk about X, then you can absolutely make a motion which is on this list to call the question. By calling the question, what you're actually saying is like, I want to end the debate, or I move the previous question is how it's on here. And basically that's meant to say, like, we've heard, like, the discussion's getting repetitive, and we want to move on from the debate. The chair can also do this and say, I appreciate all your thoughts, but without any objection, I'm going to end the debate and move on to the next thing. Just keep the meeting moving, make sure that we're not being too repetitive in the things we're doing. So now I'm going to open up the questions, but I want to go through just a couple of things that are more my pet peeves of Robert's Rules, if anything. When you say that you're going to table something, it has a very particular meaning, which is often mistaken. So you'll find that it confuses people because they don't know exactly what it means. If you think about it as you're at a meeting, you're all at a round table, and you go to put something on the table, you can't leave with that item on the table. But tabling something is very temporary. So if someone wants to add X to the agenda, and you decide to table talking about that amendment, you can't leave without that item on, like, the meeting can't end naturally with that item still on the table. Now, if you move to postpone it indefinitely, that does usually what people colloquially say, table it, that's what they mean, is to do it indefinitely. But it's a little clearer if you think about it in that specificity, that leaving it on the table, you can't just leave something on the table. But with that said, that doesn't stop a meeting from ending. So you put something on the table, like a lot of groups will table something, meaning to postpone indefinitely, and then they get to the end of the meeting, and then they vote to adjourn, and it's unanimous, then it actually does get left on the table. But like in my Robert's Rules mind, I'm like, don't leave anything on the table. You have to take care of it. But so that's just something to think about. That I always have a little tick whenever I hear I want to table something. It's like, oh, do you really want to table it? Or but it's just about being clear. And I mean, maybe that's just me. Maybe your organizations understand it as something different. And as long as basically the whole thing, as long as everyone understands what you're doing, everyone's on the same page, then that is great. You're having a great meeting. So does anyone have any other questions? I can see that you're all not as excited about Robert's Rules. That's okay.
We just show it differently.
You're saying that, and I'm reading on your handout, lay something aside temporarily, you lay the question on the table. But are you saying that the group should really resolve that before the meeting is adjourned?
Yeah, ideally, because the idea is that if you lay something aside, you're not done with it yet. You're not done with it for that meeting. And that there is some kind of demand to talk about it again. Because if I didn't want to talk about it anymore, I would say, I want to postpone it indefinitely. I want to postpone it until next meeting. I want to postpone it until 2 months from now or something. And
so
then
it's okay to lay something on the table with a time frame? Would that be okay?
Till 9 o'clock.
Would that make you feel better?
That would help me. But what would help me better is if you squeeze it into another spot in the agenda. Like, what if we lay this aside until after the second item of old business? And then it fits right in there really nicely, and it's all very smooth.
In my experience, I'd like to table this, is kind of used, assuming everybody's getting along, it's used to table because Joe has an issue and he has to leave at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So could we table this issue until after Joe's item is done so we can move forward? And then after Joe's gone, we can talk about this later.
Yeah, because tabling is just another way of amending the agenda. Like saying, but you don't have to have everything exact times. You don't have to have a 2-hour meeting or have to end it at a certain time. You don't have to put those restrictions on it. Just like you don't have to have it all in like a beautiful agenda like I would like. You could just say like, oh, like we're gonna talk about this until Joe has to leave, and then we can talk about the other things. So as long as everyone understands what the process is and it's open, then it's great. It's working. Question?
I mean, another way to deal with that is they're not really ready to talk about it, and it's going to go, wander around, tabling it. It requires a second. It doesn't require debate. Can somebody propose that, maybe someone, chair or something, how about we refer this to a committee who gathers some more stuff and brings it back as next time?
So,
which is another motion.
Postpone to a definite time?
So yes, that's what you're saying is a chair being responsive and saying like, now I see that you want to lay it aside, but do you want to lay it aside because you want to move it into a committee? Or so a chair could kind of know the members and figure that out. But another thing in what you said was that if it says no debate, that means that it doesn't make sense to have a debate on that item, just move it to a vote. So if someone wants to refer it to, I don't know, which motion did you say was?
Well, the option is to table it, sort of not do it for another time as opposed to later in the meeting. Maybe the option is to table it, but have a committee that's more name or that. Trying to figure out.
So
what's the purpose of tabling it if that's all you're going to do?
So the idea of tabling it would be that someone wants to talk about it later, wants to move on to another item. So you would lay it aside. Someone would make that motion, someone would second it, and then it's not debatable. So there's not a formal debate. Like you're not standing up and saying like the table's great. I love putting stuff on it. Let's do this all the time. And then someone says, oh, I hate the table. Like Andrew told me it was horrible, and I would never lay things on the table. But like. Because that's not necessary. It'd just be the motion, the second, and then you say, is there any objection? If there's an objection, then you vote, and then it is a majority vote. Okay. Yes.
If an item is on the agenda, and for one reason or another, let's say the person that's supposed to present the item, the topic, is not prepared, and they make a motion to postpone the discussion of that topic, does it automatically go on the next meeting agenda if they are prepared, assuming they're prepared? Does it go on the agenda, the next meeting agenda as old business?
It depends on what the item is. It depends on the motion that's made. So if the item if it was a report, and let's say that the president isn't ready to talk about venues yet, and you postpone it, that wouldn't move into old business just because you talked about it before. It would stay in their report. But old business is just for like bills or bylaws amendments, things like that. So it's more like pieces of business. And so like I'd like they have a very particular meaning of the word business, and it's like bills or things that are voted on, like decisions that are made. Whereas like if it's talking about X and someone isn't prepared, you would say postpone it until they're ready to talk about it, and then that would involve the chair going back to the person when they're setting the agenda for each meeting and saying, are you ready to talk about it now? Should I add it? Shouldn't I?
It wouldn't have been, it's an item that has to be voted on.
So, yeah, so then...
It's a particular kind of committee.
Yeah, so if it's something from a committee, then it would always be in the committee report. So, okay.
Sorry, this group is unique.
Yeah. they all are, believe me.
It's not just your neighborhood committee, organization. They're reviewing topics that, yeah, they're sensitive topics. It's, and they have to vote on each case that's on their agenda. Right, so then, let's just say the person that was assigned that case is not prepared for whatever reason. There wasn't enough information, the person that it pertains to isn't present, so it gets postponed. And I'm wondering if it does in fact go on under old business on the next meeting.
It can, if that makes sense. If as the agenda setter, like it makes sense for you to put in old business, then do that. If you think that you might need to check with them again and see if maybe it's ready, or you like putting the cases in a particular order makes sense every time, then do it. I would say make sure you do it the same way every time, and that you treat all of them the same, so that it's not like you have a favoritism or a particular dislike of a certain item. So like, as a chair, you can figure out how you're going to set the agenda when you come into situations like that, and keep setting it like that. And maybe someone will say, I don't like that, and then they amend bylaws so that you have to do it a certain way. But chances are, like, as long as you do it the same way, and people understand if it's an old business, like, oh, they weren't ready to talk about that case last time. Does that answer your question?
No, but I
Because it's all about...
I would have to explain it to you, and I will later. Or I'll email you.
It's all about setting the agenda and the chair knowing the body and representing the body. Like, if the body will understand it as being in a certain place on the agenda, then that's where you should put it. If it doesn't make sense to try to hide things in the agenda when the agenda is meant to be open. Yeah. So if you had further questions, I'd be happy to engage you on that, because, like I said, this is one of the few times I've gotten enough people to stay in the room while I talk. A couple other things just in passing. Overruling a chair. There are procedures in Robert's rules where if someone doesn't like a decision, that a chair is made or something, that it can get very contentious. And at that point, I would say just like, go through the steps. The goal of being a chair is that your decisions are never biased and you're making them for the good of the organization. Like, you're not setting the agenda a certain way because it fits some kind of personal ideals you have or something like that. Because I'm not setting the agenda as myself. I'm not setting it as Robert. I am setting it as the body. So you're trying to avoid having like people getting upset with your decisions by not making any decisions yourself and having the body make the decisions. Trying to defer to the body and make them decide, because and then it's not just me as the chair fighting with one person. It's like, this is what everyone wants. This is what we're all doing. This is the organization moving on. Executive session. If like, this is one of those things that sometimes people abuse, where they're like trying to kick someone out of a meeting and move into executive session. Keep in mind that if you're a public body, there are very particular laws involving executive session that I'm not really going to get into. But as a practical matter, try to avoid them unless it's absolutely necessary. Like if you're talking about a personnel decision or something that's very private, it might make sense to do that. But be very careful with that, because that's like, if you wanted to have some kind of shady organization, then just go have that. You don't need Robert's rules to have like a cabal of some kind. What else is there? Yeah, I think that's probably a question.
A board goes into executive session. The chair asks for the executive session. You ask, is this a personnel question? And it's just that we are going into executive session, clearly wanting to get rid of some people. Then what could you say at that moment?
Okay, that's when, like, one of the incidental motions is like a point of order, saying like, or a point of parliamentary procedure, like you have to do this, you have to do it this certain way. What you're referring to was a common problem with public bodies, in that in New York State's open meeting laws, you have to give a reason for going into executive session. Robert's rules doesn't require that, but like open meeting law does. So you have to say, like, it's a personnel decision. There's actually a lot of case law involving that I'm like kind of familiar with. That's something that Bob Freeman is the expert on more than I am. But he, like, so that you can only do so much though. If a body is going into executive session and they're not supposed to, you should raise it and raise the alarm and say, like, point of order, point of parliamentary procedure, like you have to, like, you can't do that, you have to, yeah. So, but the idea being that, like, that you want the whole body to know that what they're about to do is wrong, and like, is not, like, you're moving into executive session, you haven't told us why, you're required to because our bylaws say you have to give a reason, then you're saying, well, hold on, you're going against the bylaws, like, you can't suspend the bylaws, you have to follow them, like, do you all know that what you're about to do is breaking the bylaws? Yeah, so it's like, that's one of those tough things where it's like, if it's hard to conquer bad actors when you have Robert's rules, because Robert's rules is all about, like, doing the right, in my mind it's doing the right thing, but doing the complicated right thing. Yes.
How do you know when you need a parliamentarian, and how do they participate?
One of the things I like to say is that if you're at a meeting and someone cracks open their Robert's rules and you say, hold on, let me look at that, that's when you know that your organization needs help. Because, like, as soon as the book opens and you're flipping through 600 pages, the meeting's lost. Like, you killed so much time just looking through. Like, the idea being that you want the chair to have as much knowledge to get through the meeting. And so, as long as you're making good decisions that are best for the body, maybe it's not the end of the world if you don't do it exactly as in this like strange verbiage that they use throughout this book. But like the benefit of having a parliamentarian come in and look at your meetings is that meetings are so unique, and like bylaws are unique, the purpose is very unique. So really, like when I went to UAlbany, I read their bylaws, their constitution, and then I ended up knowing more about their constitution and bylaws. Like I pointed out that one of them was their charter and one of their constitution. They had no idea. They didn't even realize like those things. So by having a parliamentarian come in, you get like an outside neutral perspective to look at what's happening. Is that to say you have to have a parliamentarian come in? No. Like if you're writing agendas that work every time, no, you don't need to have a parliamentarian come in and do your agenda. If every day it's just like everyone's saying pages and you're flipping around and looking at Robert's rules, then it's more of like some kind of Robert's rules study than it is like a meeting with business. So then you might want to think about taking a meeting to teach everyone the rules of Robert's rules, and then so then you can run your meetings more smoothly.
Thank you, Andrew. That's awesome.
So if I send you an email, you send me an electronic copy of this motion?
Yes.
So it can get handed out to every new board member?
Absolutely. I can absolutely do that. Yep. Good.
Thank you very much.